Welcome back. It's 22 minutes after 9 o'clock. This is the Tuesday edition of Today on eNCA. I'm Dan Moyane. Now, gender-based violence continues to rear its ugly head in South Africa on a daily basis. Almost every day, we hear stories of gruesome attacks on women. We've seen conferences and protests against this, but there seemingly is no end in sight. Now, let's take a look at the role of relationships in gender-based violence. Relationship expert Paula Quinsee is joining us now via Skype. Paula, good morning to you. I read an article, an opinion piece that you have written. I would like to start our interview this morning by quoting you and then just asking you to comment on this. In this article, you say, and I quote, "Abuse is a learned behavior. It is a choice to abuse, and the behavior can be changed if the abuser is willing to take responsibility for their behavior and make sustainable changes." Now, my question is, we're seeing a lot of pressure on government to change the laws, to deploy resources for the police, and the president has declared this a national emergency. And we've seen protests and stuff. But if it is a learned behavior, surely it begins with me rather than government. We can have the best laws to tackle GBV, but unless I choose to change, those laws will be ineffective.
You're right. You know, there's a combination of factors that contribute, but it does start in the home because that's where we are first exposed to relationships, and we're exposed to things like domestic abuse, whether it is male on female or whether it is female on male, because it happens across the spectrum, and that includes LGBTQI as well. And that is where the first foundational years of a child's life is where we learn our emotional foundation and our emotional ability to react and respond to situations. It's where we learn things like how to deal with conflict, emotional safety, and how to respond and react to our primary caregivers that is providing that emotional safe space for us to be in.
Yeah, you say that GBV is always often associated with male on female abuse, but very little is spoken about the female on male abuse and violence, or LGBTQI abuse. Why would you think that seldom we don't speak about the female on male violence in the home?
It comes to the typical stereotyping and conditioning, from a male perspective. It's also sometimes it seems unbelievable that females can abuse males. There's also the shame and the embarrassment or the stigma that's attached to it in terms of how can a male be abused by a female. But the reality is it does happen, and there are male victims out there as well, including the LGBTQI spectrum.
Now, within organizations, in this article, you point out that there's also another seldom spoken about area within organizations. I guess that would include institutions and companies. What kind of abuse and violence is there that you've picked up within organizations?
So in the workplace, it's commonly called or referred to things like bullying. There is also sexual harassment or misconduct, or innuendos, sexual innuendos. There is also a toxic corporate culture and environment where people use positions of power to abuse or manipulate or drive their own agendas.
Yeah, and I mean, if you look at it all around in the home, you've mentioned there, we know there's verbal abuse, there's psychological abuse, there's emotional abuse, there's financial abuse. And when you look at the cost of GBV to South Africa in the economy, I mean, it runs into billions of rand a year, and we've got one of the worst rape statistics in the world.
Absolutely, and that's why we can no longer not do anything about it. The evidence is there through all the research, through all the stats, And so now we have to work collectively, where it starts with us as individuals in the home, and it starts within organizations, and it starts within the government as well, in terms of what is acceptable and unacceptable behavior. And we have to work collectively together. It's how we raise our boy children and our girl children in terms of what is healthy and unhealthy behaviors. In the workplace, there should be a no tolerance where abuse is concerned. And I know that some corporates that I'm working with at the moment have taken a very proactive stance, because they've realized that even though employees are working from home, some of them are not safe at home. And they've had to step in where some of their employees have been exposed to domestic abuse and violence.
Yeah, and it is not even helpful that in some of those work environments, although they're working from home, that their organization might not have been free of harassment, bullying, and abuse. So it's like a double whammy for many employees.
Absolutely. And when we go back to just a basic human mankind or humanity or our basic rights, abuse of any form and shape is unacceptable. It goes against our basic human rights as human beings.
Now, before I let you go, Paula, relationship-wise, you've mentioned that we need to focus as much as we do on the girl child. We must also focus on the boy child. And we've got the stereotypes in a very patriarchal society like we have here in South Africa. If there were things, like 3 or 4 things that you think we should be focusing on when we bring up our children to ensure that they have healthy relationships where there's no violence, what should those be?
I think it's definitely creating an environment where girls and boys are exposed to what is acceptable and unacceptable behavior. And this is where relationships with fathers and daughters play a crucial role, because daughters look to their dads and it's their first real love relationship that they experience and are exposed to, and it's how dads interact and relate with moms and them as a daughter. That creates a foundation for women when it comes to how men behave and act and conduct themselves in relationships. We should also teach our boy children in terms of what is unacceptable when it comes to things like, viewing women as things like they're not sexual objects, that what is consensual and non-consensual, and what does toxic or abusive behavior look like when it comes to things like physical strength, and also particularly where sex and rape is concerned, and that even if it's from a pure relationship point of view where your partner says no, no is no, and forcing yourself on your partner or thinking that it's your right because it is your wife or your girlfriend is the same as rape. And then also we need to teach it comes back to basic values, I think, where values and boundaries, healthy boundaries, and I think also where there are consequences for actions. So consequences, and that ranges right up to government as well in terms of our justice and our policing system, but also places of safety and shelter for children and boy children and girl children, and human trafficking. I mean, it's a vast, vast thing that we need to tackle here, and we all need to work at it collaboratively to tackle it.
Thank you very much, Paula Quinsee, relationship expert here. Now,